definitely. Just before coming onto this interview, I was watching your most recent video, which was the lovely lecture on massacre and killings and how we made us. It was sort of like a great annotation of like evolution and natural selection. Was that brought about by the whole COVID situation that we all kind of like slumped into now?
Well, not actually. I'd been thinking of, you know, vaguely technical or scientific sort of things, immediate turn off for most people. But what spurred me on this one was that I was a fill-in dad at a parent-teacher night for my grandson.
Yeah.
And I asked the teacher, it was kind of a trick question because I usually ask it, primary school kids, how do you teach them evolution? It can't be easy, can it? How do you teach them the mechanism? And she was kind of a bit nervous there. And she started mumbling on about creatures needing to be different. I thought, well, that's great. Yeah, I can imagine it. If people think that the giraffe, sitting around on the savannah thinks, damn, if only I had a longer neck, that'd be good. I tell you what, the next kid I have is going to have a long neck.
Long neck, yeah.
She really had no idea because people are so polite. They don't want to say that all this lot got wiped out and there was a slaughter and the only ones left alive, were either lucky or freaks, So what they tend to say is something outcompeted the other thing, which doesn't really help. Whereas I think people have kind of missed the fundamental point that there is no changing like this sort of morphing that we imagine from watching videos where something slowly changes and it's simply that everybody else in the room was dead. And it kept going like that, and it's very hard to grapple time because what do you suppose we can comprehend? As you get older, I suppose you get a grasp of a year or two, but we don't. You think of yourself going back 15 years even. You've got the picture, you've got the self, but it's not. And as for hundreds and thousands and forbid millions of years, it's just incomprehensible.
It really is, yeah. A great person to speak to about that, who I've had on my podcast as well, is William Van Hippel. I'm not sure if you've heard of William Van Hippel. He's a very renowned evolutionary biologist, and we had this great conversation. We're talking about like the evolution of man and weapons and how we came about to discovering weapons, and how the throwing motion was the start of absolutely everything that we now know as weapons. And he just gives a great breakdown of how that went about happening, and also, as you discussed in your video, in regards to like death and blood shed, and we're here as a result of millions of deaths. And that's how evolution is, whether it be natural deaths or whether it be through wars, through battle of resources, food, or simple things as water. Like one of your ancestors could have got knocked over the head in a well just because someone else's ancestors wanted to get to the water before them or wanted to maintain.
It can be very unusual things. I often I had actually it was a prison years ago, a kind of open prison, but it was a mad one. It was an old country house, and two of the officers there were fanatical creationist fundamentalist Christians, and just weren't buying into the idea of the changes the way they happen. But I kind of got them into the idea by suggesting, well, imagine there's a predator running around eating everybody. Now, the only ones who managed to survive were the ones who could get into the unusual caves in that area, which were only about 4 feet deep. So the creature couldn't get in there. So everybody taller than that is getting munched up.
Yeah.
So they're either wiped out completely, or the oddball dwarfs that are around, they're the only ones who get to breed. So given not too much time, the only people around are these short people.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like was a bit of a light bulb for them. They realized, that could happen. And of course, with great complexity, it just seems too astonishing. But as a data analyst, you'll know that we have a kind of a human bias on looking at patterns for things
Yeah.
compared to an unbiased look on things,
Yeah.
in which we rely on the numbers to tell us.
Mhm.
But I think I even did something once where, just as a kind of sidebar about people winning lottery numbers and how they were very much convinced that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 yourself were unlikely to come up.
Yeah.
And I had a ball there, and I'm painting it with things. I said, look, those balls when they go in are all the same, actually.
Mm.
You wouldn't think there was anything between any of them if they had nothing painted on them.
Mm.
So why should there be something when we paint a symbol on it? That
Yeah.
symbol, 1 or 2 or 3, only means something to us. In fact, there was a lottery win, I think about 3 weeks ago, in South Africa's big national
Yeah.
lottery. And that wasn't 1, 2, 3, 4. It was 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and
Oh
the
wow.
extra ball was a 10.
It was a
Now,
10. Yeah.
most people complained that this was proof that it was rigged.
Mm.
And not only that, 20 people won because instead of the usual one, because I suppose there's people who fill in their own numbers, enough of them,
Mm.
microscopically few, but enough of them felt, I'll take an extra chance on consecutive numbers, you never know.
Yeah.
But in a way, that's more proof to me that it's not rigged than it being rigged. If it was
Mm.
being rigged, you'd try and pick numbers that people felt were natural and all of that. But
Yeah. So like the natural progression of numbers. Yeah.
it's very hard to. I mean, how many people do you feel who are convinced that events that happen to them, especially bad ones, are part of some plan of destiny?
Oh yeah, we always seem to make that sort of like association or link to anything bad that happens to us. It's like it was meant to be. So for instance, going back to the incident that I said happened to me in regards to the shooting, after that I kind of straightened out my life a bit. And so in order to make sense of what happened, I'm like, okay, that was meant to happen in order for me to become a changed
Right.
person and not get caught up in a particular lifestyle. And that happened very early on in my life. I was 17 when it happened. So
So
it's
that's
almost like
nice as well. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So it's almost like that was perfect timing. So you always make the association and kind of create the narrative around things that do happen to us as not just by chance but by some divine purpose.
Indeed, I thought. I mean, just because we were talking about the lottery win this week's was won by one person in the UK, 40 million. Good for
Mm,
him. But I'm even though I try to be rational, if I'd won it, it'd be very hard to shake off the feeling
mm,
that there was a not a divine hand at play, but some
yeah,
kind of uh,
yeah.
maybe I'm living a simulation, and this is part of the
And
act.
it was your turn. Yeah. I mean,
Uh,
humans our desire to create meaning around stuff is really, really interesting and intriguing because the more I read into like psychology, and in particularly, I've been reading a lot of Jordan Peterson's work, and the pursuit for meaning is one of those things that kind of draw us to the divine. It's like we need to find that thing that kind of makes sense for everything else that's happening along in our lives. So
it
it's been
must be, mustn't it? I mean, you think of almost any society or culture, they will, in the absence of any understanding of how something's come to be, they'll find something and hook it onto a supernatural
yeah,
one.
most
Uh,
definitely.
and I guess there's some comfort in that.
Yeah.
It's a bit like conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
Uh, they're always fairly dark and evil, fine, and the
Mhm.
usual culprits are up there, Bill Gates and all of that.
Yeah.
But I think it's something that people take comfort in. The
Mm.
idea that instead of a world with Donald Trump-like leaders stumbling around, who tweeting off their commands, there's actually somebody who knows what the hell he's doing.
They do it. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
evil or not, at least it's somebody's got a plan, as
Yeah.
opposed to randomness.
Yeah.
Uh, that certainly must be. I must say, um, there've been times in my life when I've felt that myself. Should I introduce myself a little?
Yes, please do. Yeah. Please
Okay.
do. I know we're just sort of like
Oh,
delving into it.
we're just having
Yeah,
a little warm up here,
a little
but
warm up. Yeah, just getting to understand
you
each
never
other. That's
know.
absolutely
There's
fine.
always the danger one of us might say something useful, and then we've got it in the wrong spot. So forget it.
Most
Okay,
definitely.
Francis,
But
good to meet you.
nice to
David
meet you,
McMillan.
David. It's an absolute
You.
pleasure to have you on. Actually, first of all, I want to before you go ahead and introduce us,
Hmm.
I want to thank you for taking the invitation on because I'm sure you're an extremely busy individual at the moment. And yeah, I've been following your story for a while, and it's super intriguing. So I was just blown away by the fact that you accepted my invitation. So first of all, thank you for coming onto the podcast and sharing
No,
your.
right. It's a pleasure to be here, really. Um, yeah, you can imagine normally Sunday is a day to worship the Lord and all His works, but my relations with the Almighty have been a bit ragged over the years,
We're gonna get
so
to that. Yeah.
I don't seem to have that. But indeed, for those who don't know me, I was I guess, a career smuggler for over 40 years. Began back in the hippie area in the 70s,
Wow.
um, in which we all believed that the world was wrong, we were right. A very common belief amongst 17, 18-year-olds,
Yeah.
and that all drugs should be legal and turn everybody on. And since they weren't, and there was a bit of money to be made, uh, let's go get some. So, was it a good career? I don't know. It was interesting, but I had several big arrests. I was smuggling. Well, I began smuggling all sorts of things. Gold into India,
Wow.
even video recording heads. Wherever there was a difference in some kind of margin between borders. Then Thai sticks, opium, heroin, cocaine. I was pretty open-minded about that, and of course, people think, well, you can't get any worse than heroin. Well, of course, along the way, I picked up a couple of accidental drug habits, being
Mm.
so close to it and having it around me all the time. Just killing time in hotel rooms somewhere in Asia, waiting for the man to turn up. I'll just have a little line of this and a line of
Mm.
that. And then you get back home and must have picked up a
Continues.
flu somewhere. My legs are kicking. No, I didn't want a whiskey, spat it out, couldn't eat a sandwich. I know, I'll have a bit of that shit that I brought back. Oh, wait a minute, David, what have you
Yeah.
got? But I suppose the the advantage of doing it in a from source country backwards that I wasn't too much on the front line, um, but also had quite a bit of experience, especially in Australia, um, going straight from source countries down onto the street level.
Mm.
Um, have you lost me? Oh no, I'm still here.
No, you're still here. Yeah.
Mm. But that was also a bit of an education as well. But I was a bit of a kind of soft-hearted dealer in a way. I'd find myself at 3 o'clock in the morning driving out to see somebody who was sick.
Mm.
And I also kind of learnt that you can't be, um, you won't last long if you're some kind of ruthless maniac. A lot of kids of a certain generation thought, well, I'll go into narcotics business. And the first thing they do is to go to a hardware store and buy a
Whole bunch of guns.
chainsaw and a splash guard.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but um, I got arrested in a massive trial that took place in Australia.
Mm.
Ran for 6 months, 119 witnesses.
Wow.
It was a conspiracy because there were no drugs found. But it there was nobody came forward to say yes, he sold me drugs, and I guess that in a sense was um, better to have in a kind of ruthless business to have some sort of ethics to it. But
Yeah.
looking back on it, of course, I think I spent probably um, one way or another over 20 years in prisons.
Wow.
Not
And
only
that's across various continents as well, right?
yes,
Yeah.
only half of that convicted, the rest waiting trial.
Mm.
and twice facing a death penalty, including in Bangkok in Thailand.
Yeah.
And okay, it's rare that they execute a Westerner,
Mm.
um, but I think they were going to do it in my case because
Yeah.
unusually the Australian and the British governments were supplying material to the Thais to help me get convicted.
Mm. Did they
Uh,
want you to get convicted in Thailand? Did they prefer that, do you reckon?
yes, they
Because of the severity of the sentence.
well, I think it was when was that? 93,
Mm.
94, 95. They thought it was about time that a bit of um, one of somebody who looked like a regular sort of
Mm.
citizen um, was executed just to say, it
Mm.
can happen. It was by machine gun in those days.
Yeah.
Um, they used to give you a bunch of flowers and you got to say some prayers, and a bit of string was tied to the machine gun, which was attached to a bench with
Oh.
3 bits of string and 3 officers pulling at it, so that it spared them the idea that any particular one of them had provided the
Oh,
fatal
okay, I
shot.
see. Yeah, so it avoids them of the guilt.
Mm.
Yeah.
I don't. I guess perhaps they were trying to work it into the Buddhists' belief system. I'm not too sure whether that
Mhm.
would fit too well.
Yeah.
But so facing that likelihood, I escaped from there in what was quite difficult, but I also had a bit of luck.
Mm.
Then went on and found myself a few years later in a similar situation in Karachi in Pakistan.
Uh,
Death wouldn't have been very likely in that, but I was fairly badly mistreated. I was tortured there, which again doesn't happen to uh, Europeans too often.
mm.
But and I'd started to think that I just can't, win at this thing.
Yeah.
Not necessarily because I wasn't willing to put the work in to try and take the precautions, but I mean, for one of them, that Thailand thing, I took elaborate stuff. Francis, I had 2 passports, and they were very carefully put together so that
Mm.
nobody knew about them. And despite all of that, a bunch of unlikely circumstances came about. In this case, it was the American DEA testing some equipment in Bangkok.
Yeah.
I found myself arrested, and I almost felt like fate was working against me.
Mm.
So I guess that was about as dark as the despair of a god, and I
Mm.
was suicidal for quite a while. I mean, I wanted
I
to
can
escape,
imagine. Yeah.
but I mostly wanted to escape to get out, go to the Dusitani Hotel because I knew how to get to the roof there and jump off it.
Mm. Oh wow. There's something that intrigues me about you because I've watched quite a few of your videos. I've also just recently watched the documentary or the movie slash documentary, which is absolutely amazing, Made in Australia. And one thing I realized about you, even speaking to you now, is that your level of IQ, you're well spoken, you're a super intelligent individual. Someone like you, were you in the game for the money, or were you in it because you knew how to play the system and you enjoy the actual ride of it? Because there's something. The reason why I'm asking, because I've spoken to several individuals who've been involved in the trafficking industry or been gangsters and so forth, and those individuals tend to be very high IQ individuals, and to them the thrill comes from being able to beat a system which almost seems unbeatable. So it's not necessarily the money. They never really talk about the money. It's never the case of, oh, I was making millions a week or millions a month. It's always, I managed to get away. I knew they were after me. I played this game on them and I played that. And it was quite similar to your story. So what was it for you? What was the driving factor?
I think there's very much a great part of that is similar for me.
Mm.
Um, a bunch of us were. I met some crooks
Mm.
by chance, and they were mostly safecrackers and robbers,
Mm.
but they were going to the drug business, and they were talking about would it be possible to import. Now, the more they said no, it's too dangerous, or it can't be done, or such and
Mm.
such had a bad experience, and I took a couple of experimental trips and then laid out what the difficulties were. The more people said, this can't be done. Yeah, I was same as the guys you've been talking to. I thought, no, that's not right. It can be.
Yeah.
Now, what is that? Just arrogance, or sort of thinking yourself of the center of the universe, or what? Not entirely. Look, I think many many of my readers and the people who watch my channel on YouTube, they are kind of like, I guess, armchair smugglers, in the sense that it's something that I think many people have thought about it. And when I was recruiting couriers, so many of them, and the best of them, were not crooks by nature or not involved in crime. The best of them were just kind of regular citizens, if there is such a thing as a regular citizen. But
law-abiding citizens, initially.
Yeah, that they'd been at airports, and I think you could ask at an airport, when you're surrounded by that system of security, it would tell people, ask themselves, I don't know, could I get through? Or they watch somebody hit, and how many times you think, Francis, if when you've seen something unfortunate happen to somebody, they've been pounced on by police or something like that, of course we ask ourselves, what would I have done?
Yeah.
Would there be a way to avoid that situation? So, and even in movies and books, we kind of, doesn't matter whether the person's the hero of the story or the bad guy, if the situation seems sort of hopeless or difficult, we want to see whether they'll get out. You think of, everybody just about knows the Battle of Stalingrad. Germans have gone in the wrong time of year, and they fought over a city they should have bypassed. And so many people are often asking on those question forums, what could they have done, to get out of it? Now, it doesn't matter that they were on the other side to us. And in the same way that I don't think it matters that the villain's on the other side, you do ask yourself, can you get out of it? And I think I took my kind of pleasure in it, I guess, was the research, the planning, and then finding a solution. Now, once the thing had been tested and worked, it was a kind of a strange downer. Like, well, if
once you completed a mission, you mean?
Yeah.
You felt down.
Well, I remember one where I noticed that at Sydney Airport, there was a number of flights that were domestic from city to city within Australia, and then flew on to foreign destinations. Now, when they were within the country, the passengers got a kind of domestic pass if they were getting off again. Say they went Melbourne, Sydney, and if they wanted to, if they had a reason to, they could even take their bags off before flying on to the next foreign place. And they'd show this little slip, and you've just come from a national location, and out you go. So I thought, well, surely there'd be a way of making it look like that's what you were. And there was. It was a matter of somebody, if I imagine we transpose it, we say that there's Paris-London flights all the time, every day. Nobody's likely to get hit on one of those. But if if Francis's courier, if I can give you a few, takes off at Bangkok and is ticketed through to Paris and then on to London, if somebody boards the same flight at Paris and picks up his bag through, and then goes out, and they say, well, where have you been? Now, there's some technicalities, but this just makes it interesting. The bag that he picks up will have no green stripe on it. The green stripe you've probably noticed
Hmm.
on bags means you've come from Europe.
Yeah.
So I gave people from time to time um, bags which had under the handle uh, the, the the baggage check, which they could, once they picked up the bag, they could remove the one that had been in use from Bangkok, just
Yeah.
tear it off, and pull a little strip, and it would
So from a country
unravel.
of no threat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to appear to have come from somewhere that was not
Yeah.
suspicious.
Yeah.
Now, here's the point. When I usually, just about always did the test myself
Mm.
with something new. And I got back and I had my few kilos in there.
Mm.
Um, and it had come from Cali in Colombia in this case. Now, you'd think I'd be happy or relieved or something, but
Mm.
as soon as I walked out of that door, I'd say to myself, right, it
Mm.
worked. I was correct.
Mm.
And then, yeah, so what? Good
On
for
to the
you.
next challenge.
Yeah,
Yeah. Do you feel
uh,
deflated that it was too easy at the time?
yeah, I know, but I was also a little insulated in as much as I'd picked up some pretty good mid-level contacts, so that
Mm.
I would charge about, well, let's just say, I don't know, a kilo of coke today is worth 38,000 or something
Mm.
like that. Apparently, it's gone up a bit since C19.
Yeah.
Quality right through the floor. But if you're willing to sell it to a wholesaler for just 30, yeah, you'll be given good treatment and protected,
Yeah.
because whoever takes it from you at that price doesn't want anything to happen to you.
Mm.
In fact, you find yourself that they'll be very careful with people get greedy, and they forget to value themselves highly enough
Mm.
in a mercenary world. Um, whereas even you can imagine if some desperado criminal who's likely to do anything if the opportunity is there. If you're charging just regular rates or high rates, he's got a particular reason to value you above everybody else.
Yeah.
Um, so that if he's looking for somebody to target and thinks, I know that guy would have built up a bit of money, I'm going to engineer a situation where
Mm.
get a honey trap and find out where he keeps his money, or
Yeah.
kidnap his mum, or God knows what. If you're worth quite a lot because you give the best deal, you don't have any of that problem. It's very
Mm.
unlikely. So I could just, because I wasn't super obsessed about the money,
Mm.
I could afford to pay my associates and helpers very well.
Yeah.
And also there'd be enough money around to if they got into trouble. I always offered that option that
Mm.
I think it's only happened twice, but in those occasions where somebody does end up being arrested, there was a great courier. He was known as the Lollipop Man because he looked like one of those guys that holds the
We'll help the kids
"Stop
cross the
Go"
road.
sign, on the
Yeah.
crossing. Um, he he just had that face. He couldn't get arrested, really.
Mm.
But he walked in at Balquier Airport on the day that the Federales had a big
Mm.
army operation there, and they were just pulling everybody to bits.
Yeah.
And he had a couple of kilos in shoes and ended up arrested. But the good thing about operating around that level, you can go straight in the next
Mm.
day and say, look, here's your options. You can hang around a bit. You'll be treated well. We put him in. Managed to get him transferred to the hospital section, outside hospital, so he
Mm.
was not even in the prison at all.
Yeah.
Because Barranquilla prison, you can imagine, is a bit not for the faint-hearted.
Imagine.
It's
Yeah.
it's kind of run by the guys in there. They wouldn't be in there if they were big enough, and
Mm.
so they're not really, and they're very They got factions and gangs and all the other kind
Yeah.
of entertainments that people have in those places. So he was uh, got the Lollipop Man back in within 3 weeks. His biggest fear, oddly enough, was once he was out, because he'd overstayed the visa. This had taken a few weeks. He was more fearful of crossing the border on an expired visa than he was ever running around with kilos of coke.
Of cocaine.
We had to put him on a boat
Mm.
that was going over to Panama. He said it was a pretty rough crossing, and most of the other passengers were sort of paying their way by taking 8 or 10 ounces of Charlie over with them.
Yeah.
Um, but that is some, that is always pleasing too, that you don't lose anybody
Mm.
in that way, because I
Is
found too that people are uh, kind of tested to their limits when they're out of their environment entirely. I mean,
yeah.
most people probably think, oh, I've seen a few programs about prisons.
Mm.
It'd be annoying, but I guess I could cope with being locked up in a UK prison.
Mm.
But if, let's just say we had to face a prison in Lagos,
Mm.
oh, I don't think that.
It'd be very different. Yeah, most definitely. When I was watching Made in Australia, to me it felt like a mix between sort of like Narcos and Catch Me If You Can. I'm not sure if you've seen both of those films. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, the reason why I made the reference to Catch Me If You Can is because you had this ingenious way of evading the police, and there was one story in particular, and I wanted to know if it was as accurate on the show as it was in real life, and that was the transaction at the maternity ward. Can you explain that story a bit for me? Because I
Well,
found it very
this was.
intriguing and ingenious.
Um, I was in touch with Chris Merkser, who wrote the screenplay for that.
Mm,
I didn't get anything about it. People are under the illusion that they have some control over their own life stories. That
mm,
somebody could write your biography; it wouldn't be official, nothing you could do about it much.
mm,
Um, but I thought better to be a little involved than not. And it seemed, because this had happened at the Mercy Hospital in Melbourne, it seemed probably they should use that.
mm,
There were a few changes made. This was the situation. I'd kind of retired at 24, which is a good age for retirement, I think. Um, but my friend and business partner, Michael, had kept going, and he was being all mysterious about the source of who gave him this Thai contact. Now, little Hassan used to travel around the world with these cutlery boxes,
mm,
the top layers of which were packed with compressed heroin.
mm,
Now, I thought, I did say to Michael, I said, you know what, you bought this contact off somebody. Somebody didn't want him anymore.
mm,
Delivers to the door and sells for a quarter of the regular wholesale price. And so somebody didn't want, he wanted you to do the great favor of giving you this guy. But he didn't give him to me. I had to pay 50,000. Yes, nonetheless, the guy's worth $1 million.
mm,
But anyway, um, I'd been under surveillance for a couple of years at the time, and so had Michael. The surveillance didn't really stop, even though I stopped doing things. But Michael came to me with this problem as follows. The Thai businessman courier had arrived in the country. They'd given him a bit of a check, let the cutlery boxes through. They were suspicious, but of course they very much wanted to know where this stuff was going. And they weren't absolutely sure it was in there. They let him go. He checked into a big hotel in town. And Michael came to me and said, listen, Hassan's got kilos in these cutlery boxes. He's in the hotel with it now.
mm,
Um, you know, there's police everywhere. What should I do? Walk away from it or not? Well, this was the problem. Say you've got a task force operation following you
mm,
for a couple of years and they haven't produced any results. Are they going to go to their boss and say, well, haven't really got anything solid, we have to let it go, or are they going to be very determined? And they were, especially since, unbeknownst to us, they'd crept into his hotel room, drilled the boxes, knew the stuff was in there. And I said to Michael, you can walk away from it. They will arrest him with the stuff and then arrest you and use all of your communications with him as evidence in a conspiracy case. But I also realized from my own interest that they wouldn't stop at that. If I'd been followed around for 2 years, I'd be dragged in as well. And then again, there's nothing quite as grisly as an arrest where there isn't solid evidence. You can imagine where a policeman is at his happiest when there's a smoking gun. When there isn't a clear-cut case, when there's no dead body and fingerprints all over, they're going to kind of use every slight thing to try and get an edge. So they got the idea that we were going to pick this stuff up, and I knew we had to at least do that. And we needed to find a good place to do it. The hospital had one major advantage, well, a few really, apart from having 3 or 4 entrances and exits. It was in a radio dead zone. The police at the time were using a VHF band, and the hospital was in a sort of well, and the amount of equipment and I don't know if you've ever noticed when you're in a hospital you can't get a good phone signal. And that's in part due to, I mean, they used to block them altogether, but they don't do that anymore because they need them. But they're bad anyway, and in this location they were terrible. So we went to see the Thai courier. Police turn up, we get rid of them. I went to my favorite radio supplier shop and got some new transmitters so that Michael and I could talk to each other, cut on frequencies just between the regular ones, so they wouldn't necessarily be able to lock onto them. And they would work within a small area. And also planted 2 cars nearby in that zone. And got myself, there were some other streets that were quite useful in that area. Some that were kind of dead ends. You know, they had those posts in the road to block them off from through traffic, a stand-up pole that locks. So everything was quite good for that. But remember, we had that this guy would not be able to help us. You know, he'd barely accept that he was under surveillance. So we went to the hospital in advance. He came, all the police are with him. I met him in the lobby. Michael's cruising around in his car at the time, waiting for my signal. I went to Hassan. I said, Hassan, look, there's a lot of police around today, but we're going ahead. You've got the thing with you? Yeah, here. No, hold on to it for a minute. Let's not get anybody, you know, getting overexcited just at this moment. Hassan, look at the flower shop over there. I've been here before. Normally it's a young girl who works this place and her mother, I think. But who's there today? Oh, some big guy. Yeah, big indeed. And the way he's cutting up those flowers, I think they're going to be a bit too short for any vase I've seen. He's not interested in sales. And then I pointed out, you know, a couple of other people in there, so he accepted that. So we had to be quick because they were having radio trouble, but by the time if they'd realized this is not working at all, they'd probably just say, well, everybody descend and try and get what you can. Took us out to the emergency entrances where the ambulances pull in. Michael came in that way, nearly skittled a couple of people, and ended up banging on the back of his car. He had some big American town car with a hotted up engine. I took Hassan to there, grabbed the cutlery boxes, threw them into Michael's window. He went into reverse, took off that way. The police started to put some trucks in front of the exit to try and block him getting out, but he was a pretty good driver and could drive backwards under control. Went out and spun around, and I took Hassan not through any of the exits, but to the back fences. So the film was a bit different. It had Clelia distracting them with
with a fake baby.
Fake baby in the pram.
Yeah.
But even though we'd spent the night before looking at a lot of distractions, we knew only too well that the chances of police letting somebody go to save somebody else, even if it was a baby, were pretty small. Not only that, saving baby only takes less than 5 seconds. You either catch the pram or you don't. That doesn't give you as much lead time as you need. When it comes, there's really there could be a worthwhile crook's handbook on what to do with troublesome policemen, as they're fondly about.
There was a heavy Bonnie and Clyde element to the movie. Is that how he played out in real life?
There was, because I knew I was being followed and bugged. There was a kind of a relationship there. Once I was just getting annoyed because I was having to take lots of zigzag stuff to get rid of the people following me, and I I led them into a blind alley and stopped, and then went back to the car that was doing the surveillance, and I said, "Look, this is my agenda for today. That's where I'm going. You can be happy with that or not. Now, you can go and do whatever you like. Now, I know that if you go back to your bosses and say, we just had this conversation, they're not going to like it and call you all sorts of names. So you probably won't. You'll go back at the end of the day and say, oh, we followed him here, there, and this will have never happened. But really, if you slow me down too much today, you'll be in the position where you'll have to do that because the other team members will know. I didn't even accept that I was under surveillance for a while because once we first realized we could listen in on the police frequencies, it was like a treasure chest of information was coming forward. I mean, even to this day, 168 megacycles, 0.250. That's the frequency the undercovers used to use. Their own communications.
Was that in the 70s or?
Yes, up until the 90s when they switched to a kind of spread spectrum digital transmission, which I started to find bugs in my office and flats that didn't come up on the scanners, and I couldn't understand why. You know what I do? It's good for you, Francis. If you ever come under MI5 for being suspicious for being an activist, you'll know if somebody's put a bug. If you, we don't need a Polaroid anymore. There was an instant camera format, but just when you're leaving your office, take a snapshot. When you come back to your office, take another snapshot. Compare the two. I did that and discovered that for no reason at all, a very heavy cabinet had been moved 3 inches. And I went and looked at the marks in the carpet, and sure enough it was. So I turned my radio up to disguise any noise, and then had to get a jack from the car to lift this thing. It was so heavy. And sure enough, they'd put a transmitter in there. And for the technically minded, it was a little aluminium box. But this was showing that the transition had begun from old-fashioned technology to much cleverer things. It was, I felt like I was diffusing a bomb getting into it, because it had a big, fat, welcoming Allen key screw in the middle. saying, "Come on, turn me. You can open me up here."
You don't know what's going to happen once you turn it.
Yeah, I mean, all it was missing was suspenders and lipstick on this thing that was trying to be so alluring. Come and get me. But I was suspicious, and I used an angle grinder to shear down one end of it. And sure enough, where that Allen key had been put in, with just a sideways bolt, if I'd turned it, it would have ground the inside of it to powder, so that I'd never find out what they were doing. But it still wasn't a lot of help. This kind of very high frequency stuff travels not very far, but very well through a lot of objects. It's very hard to pinpoint where they are. I would think if somebody had that kind of problem, they were being shadowed by a private eye for having an affair with the boss's wife. That's as clean as I can make this setup. One way you could, I'd sometimes find out if somebody was following me by doing what they hate, which is on foot. People drive around, and of course it's so easy that their high tech now is nothing better than a stripped down mobile phone with a speaker taken out and everything else stuffed in where the airbag goes behind your steering wheel. It takes its power off the car supply, so it goes constantly. And they've now got the GPS saying exactly where you are, and can even listen in on the call when they feel like.
Pretty much, yeah. I think modern technology makes that pretty much more simpler than it would have been during your time. Yeah.
You won't see too many scuff marks on a policeman's shoes anymore. There's not like they're around a lot.
Yeah. So they got drones now to do a lot of.
Sorry? If you do take them for that walk, you can go into some place that you know very well. Let's just say you know Knightsbridge, all the entrances and exits to Harrods. The situation they'll be in is they've got to abandon their cars. Don't like that anyway. They've got to go out on foot. Don't like that. They've got to be in communications in places which have got lots of dead zones. Don't like that. So they're likely to, you'll strike them getting too close to you. Now, what you do is get an envelope and put anything in it, but go to the dumpster around the back of the big store or whatever you're dragging them around. The one you're suspicious about, let him or her catch up. When you go to the dumpster, look around as though you're checking to make things clear. Fold the thing up and you put it, but where you slide it in, like it's a dead drop or something, you make a note of exactly how it went in, on what angle. So you line it up. Now, a following policeman, even if he didn't do it off his own bat, would say, look, looks like he's leaving a message for somebody. They'd all say, go and at least read it and put it back.
Yeah.
He'll never think until it's too late to put it back exactly how
he found it, yeah.
So you'd walk them around the various floors of the place and then go back an hour later. And if it's back there, but on the wrong angle, then you've got your answer. This old-fashioned stuff and a kind of old-school counter-surveillance things.
And they're still very prevalent, aren't they?